As you get older, and we do get older, your memory of childhood, of those childhood years, fragments, starts to break out into a string of impressions. Every moment of every day of your life as a child isn't stashed neatly away here someplace. The odds are good that you have very little idea what you had for lunch on the third Tuesday after your 7th birthday. It's just not in there anymore. Instead, we keep up certain memories, certain things that are more important than other memories, certain impressions that are part of our story, imprinted into us. They form us. They make us who we are. There are people, there are places, there are moments that are somehow more important and stick with us longer, go into us deeper, and speak more to the moments that are to follow and define. There are all kinds of memories like that, many of them from childhood, and for some silly reason, I remember Dixie Cups. Dixie Cups, those bitty, little, tiny paper ones that you can buy in stacks by the hundreds. These are not like today's drinks of choice, you know, the giant half-gallon, 1,200 calorie buckets that they give you at McDonald's or at 7-Eleven. This is just a teensy little scrap of paper, scarcely larger than a little plastic communion cup. And they're usually decorated with flowers or paisleys or Grovers or some other Sesame Street character that just barely, just adequate for you to get one or maybe two refreshing mouthfuls of water. In bathrooms of my grandparents' houses, when we would go to visit in the summer, there would be these dispensers set out by the sink, strategically located. And those dispensers, whenever we arrived, were always stocked neatly with an orderly column of those tiny little cups. And as someone who was a guest in those houses all the time, those cups stood like a little regiment of hospitality, a reminder that someone, even before you arrived, was thinking about you, and the fact that you might come padding through the house in the middle of the night because you were too thirsty to sleep. "Hello," said those little cups, in the silent way of things set out with care. "Are you thirsty? Why don't you have just a little drink?" We don't forget those little moments of grace. Today in Matthew's Gospel, we hear about welcoming, about receiving, about being grateful. And that is an interesting thing to hear from Matthew, because Matthew is, above all the other Gospels, a Gospel formed in the crucible of conflict. Many scholars of the Bible believe that Matthew is a later Gospel. It came to its final written form after the fall of Jerusalem. Even more important, Matthew comes to us from a time of intense, tremendous, ongoing conflict for that early fledgling church. Christians in the last part of the first century were facing a tremendous battle because they were fighting, struggling every day with this question that was being posed to them. Can you be a Christian and still be a Jew? You see, during the time of Christ and the very earliest days of the church, before it spread out to Gentile communities, Christianity was a Jewish movement. But at the time Matthew's gospel was most likely written down, Judaism was changing radically. It had just experienced a massive, crushing blow. The zealots, the hardliners, had risen up in revolution to throw off Roman rule, to cast out the invading infidels. And in response, Rome came down hard. 6 legions, 60,000 of the best troops that the empire could muster were brought against the city of Jerusalem. And after a siege that lasted several years, the city was destroyed, piece by piece, all the way up to the temple itself. The fortifications were destroyed, the buildings were destroyed, and the temple itself rebuilt with so much hope after the Babylonian invasion was razed to the ground. The Judaism that Jesus had partially known, the Judaism that had stretched all the way back to the time of Solomon, that of priests and sacrifice and temple, was destroyed. And it has never risen again. But even at that time, the temple was not the only place you could be a Jew. The temple was ruled by the righteous ones, the Sadducees, the priests, the wealthy. But Judaism was elsewhere. It was synagogues, little communities that had gathered outside of Jerusalem, where people could come and study Torah and live out a Jewish life away from the temple. It was those Pharisees, those who came before the rabbis, who were the ones who actually bothered talking to Jesus. It was in those synagogues that Christianity first began to flower and spread and be discussed as people tried to figure out who this Jesus was. And it was in those same synagogues, following the fall of Jerusalem, that Christians found themselves increasingly not welcome. Their message was not being received, and the rabbis were casting them out. Now, this is the reason that Matthew is so filled with conflict, so filled with stories of struggle. The section I read this morning, those 2 little verses, comes right after a passage that indicates how deep that conflict went. Just read a few verses ahead of that, and you will find Jesus, the Prince of Peace, saying that he has come not to bring peace but sword.